right off the bat, I have one little piece of trivia, and that is, who is the only team in NHL history to have made a playoff appearance and never lost a playoff game? That's right, it's the Seattle Kraken! What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken have won their first ever playoff game in franchise history, defeating the Colorado Avalanche, the defending Stanley Cup champions, 3-1 in Colorado. And yes, I know, it's just one game, but especially considering what most people outside of Seattle were expecting coming into this series, you better believe we're going to enjoy this win for the Kraken in that one game. It's just so beautiful. Now, I said this in the series preview video, which is something I'll be saying a few more times over the course of this video because, not to toot my horn too much, if this game is any indication, that video might be one of the best ones I've put out on this channel. But as I said, in that one, nobody expected this team coming into the season to get anywhere near the playoffs. Myself included, so obviously I don't get everything right. In fact, I think I picked the Kraken to finish 7th in the Pacific coming into the season. So having people outside of the Kraken themselves doubting them is something they've been used to all season long, and proving those people wrong. So when coming into this series, pretty much anyone outside of the Kraken and those of us that have followed them closely all season, we're picking the Avalanche to win this in 4 or 5 games. Yeah, you better believe there was a good chance the Kraken were going to make those people look foolish for a second time. And to be honest, anybody that was picking the Kraken to lose this series in 4 or 5 games, I just don't think really watched the Kraken at all over the course of the season and just saw them as a cute story of a reclamation after a terrible first season that was just going to get shoved aside after they made a playoff series as a Cinderella story and were up against the defending champs. That having been said, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. After all, it is just one game, so technically the Kraken could still lose this in 5 games. But I think there's a pretty good chance that, like I expected to be the case, no matter who ends up winning this series, it probably is going to go to 6 or 7. So yes, obviously then I don't see the Kraken sweeping or even winning this series in 5, but this first game is a very good indication that the Kraken are here to prove a point that they belong. And for the Kraken, not only is this a big win because it's the first game of the series, and teams that win the first game of a 7-game series go on to win that series 68 or a little over 68% of the time, but it also guarantees that they'll at least come back home for the 2 games at home with a series split at very worst, and have a chance to come back home having won 2 games, and again, although I don't think it's particularly likely, then a chance to win the series, sweeping it on home ice. Again, not terribly likely, and mostly for the Kraken, this win is important because now to win the series, all they have to do is win all 3 of their home games. Not that that's necessarily been their strength over the course of the season, but once you hit the playoffs, anything goes. Though, if we are going to take anything from the regular season matchups between these 2 teams, and I pointed this out in that preview video as well, the road team won all 3 of those matchups, and now it's 4 for 4 with the Kraken being the road team winning this first game of the playoff matchup. Which, I suppose, even if you want to look at it that way, then all the Kraken have to do is win the rest of their road games in this series to still win it. Either way, it's a win-win for the Kraken, and this night is just going to be a fun one for Seattle fans regardless of what happens in the rest of this series. As much fun as this game was from a Kraken perspective, I will say this for how the rest of the series could end up going. This was definitely not the best played game by the Avalanche by any means. Now, the Kraken played a pretty good game and took advantage of that, but if the Avalanche get to playing their game, it could still end up very much swinging back the other way. Probably the biggest example of that being Cale Makar, who did come back from whatever injury he was recovering from to play in this first game of the series, but it has to be said he did look like a guy that came back maybe a little bit earlier than he would have otherwise because it was the playoffs, and certainly did not have his legs all the way under him. Just didn't have the same speed or playmaking ability that he has when he's fully healthy. Still, Makar's only one player, and when this game gets started, he was far from the only Avalanche player that did not look fully ready for the game to get started, which is especially weird considering it started like 15 minutes later than it was supposed to because of ESPN running late from the absolute mess of a game that was Tampa Bay Toronto, especially on the Toronto end, and especially in the second period. But when they finally did get around to dropping the puck for Seattle versus Colorado, to the surprise of I think just about everyone, even people who see the Kraken of having a good chance in this series, it was the Kraken who got off to the fast start. And I say that's a surprise because the Kraken do not have a terribly good history of playing well, especially at the beginning of games, after long rests. The most obvious recent example being the game right after the All-Star break, where they got pretty much run out of the building against the Islanders throughout that entire game, and boy did it start right out of the gates. This time though, and somewhat ironically considering the ESPN crew started their broadcast with the Kraken are going to have to weather the Avalanche storm at the beginning, the Kraken are the ones forcing the Avalanche to weather the storm as they get right to the offensive end and start laying on that pressure right from puck drop. The Avalanche do weather that storm for a little bit, but eventually the Kraken end up capitalizing on it before the Avalanche even get a shot on goal, and it comes off of a Devon Taves turnover behind the net as he throws it out into the slot without, I think, even looking who was there. Really, the only person there to get the puck is Eeli Tolvanen, who it goes right to. Tolvanen says, "Thank you very much," fires off the shot on goal. The save, though, is made by Georgiev, but it rebounds back out to Tolvanen. He shoots again and scores to put the Kraken on the board first, just 3 minutes into the game, and the Kraken are the ones that break the ice. And for Eeli Tolvanen, the cast-off from Nashville, who the Kraken got off of waivers in December, and then was a monster through the back half of the season, earning the name Eeli Golvanen here in Seattle, he will forever be the answer to the trivia question, who was the first Seattle Kraken player to score in the playoffs? And oh man, did this one feel good from a fan perspective, especially considering, again, I was kind of ready for the exact opposite start to this game. Even if the Kraken were going to be able to come back throughout the rest of it, again, I was kind of anticipating a slower start from them. So when they get off to this hot start, and then Tolvanen gets this turnover goal to score, it was a party in the live stream. I mean, you can go back and watch it if you were there. Thank you for joining that live stream. We will be streaming again on Thursday. Shameless plug for that. So if you couldn't join for this one on Tuesday or didn't know about it, we'll be doing a live stream for the game on Thursday. And hopefully some more good moments like this one. And the Kraken nearly add a couple more good moments to it, as Matty Beniers gets a chance right up next to the net. He's able to walk it up into the low slot. Georgiev makes that save, though. Then Wemberg gets a partial break a little while later. Again, Georgiev with the glove save there. And eventually, the Avalanche are able to start turning things back the other way. And now it's maybe getting a bit dicey, where you thought, okay, the Kraken had their fun. The Avalanche have finally got their feet under them, and it's only a matter of time before this game is tied. The Kraken defensively, though, do a very good job of limiting this Colorado press to mostly the outside of one rebound chance right up next to the net from Lehkonen that Grubauer still makes a save on. And eventually, the Kraken come out on the other side having not given up a goal and with a power play. And it's a Kraken power play that actually looks a bit different than what we got used to over the course of the season, where during the season, we were used to seeing one up top and one on either side. Same was true here, although they had Sprong and then McCann on the opposite side that we're used to seeing McCann on, which was kind of weird. But same setup there, one at top, two on the sides. The other two, though, during the course of the season, the Kraken tended to go for one next to the net as a bumper, and then a guy in the slot, either looking for passes and one-timers from that bumper spot, or as redirects or rebounds in and around the net. This time, though, and due to scouting on where the Avalanche have had issues on the penalty kill, which has been right up around the net, the Kraken just threw both of those guys right next to the net as extra presence, looking for screens or rebounds, just trying to create extra traffic in front of the net. It doesn't end up leading to a goal, but the Kraken are able to hold the offensive end for a while against a pretty aggressive Avalanche penalty kill. Still, the Avalanche kill it off, and they end up forcing a face-off in the Kraken end right after this power play comes to an end. And I gotta be honest, I didn't say so at the time because I didn't want to speak it into existence, but maybe I should have said it to try to jinx it from happening. I kind of had a feeling that after this big Avalanche press and then they kill off a Kraken penalty, something was going to end up happening. The Avalanche were going to tie it, and sure enough, that's exactly what happens. The Avalanche win this face-off. Neither of these teams particularly good at winning face-offs, but the Avalanche taking advantage of a slightly worse face-off team in the Kraken during the course of this whole game. They win the face-off. Eventually, it gets to McKinnon, who just kind of skates around with it for a bit, while Rantanen, who won the faceoff in the first place, just kind of backs his way through the slot and past the entire Kraken defense, completely forgotten about, just sneaks around to the back door. And of course, McKinnon finds Rantanen on the far side. Rantanen tries to get a stick to it, doesn't, but it goes off of his skate, which he had angled towards the net, and into the back of it to tie the game at 1. And just to be clear, this is what it looks like when somebody deflects a puck in with their skate and doesn't kick it in, which is the excuse that's been used a number of times throughout Kraken history, especially in their first game ever, for why something wasn't called kicking in. But this one is definitely a legitimate goal, and it's an even game now, 1-1. The Avs then would press for more, they wouldn't get it. The Kraken end up getting a power play towards the end of this period, which again, they do a decent job of holding the offensive end, but ultimately come up empty, and we do go to the end of 1, with the Kraken feeling like they've outplayed the Avalanche, maybe slightly, but even if the Kraken have had the better of the momentum, shots on goal, and had their 2 power plays, the scoreboard is still even, and it's anybody's game going into the second. Plus, you just know that the refs are going to find some way to make sure the Avs get the next call. But before that can happen, as we get into the second period, this time even quicker for the Kraken than they did it in the first. Less than 2 minutes in, it's the Kraken on the rush, which is the way this team likes to score, quickly through the neutral zone, rushing into the offensive end and catching the defense off guard. That's just what they do as Schwartz comes down the left side with the puck, looks around as he pulls up at the top of the faceoff circle for someone to pass to, and he sees Wennberg coming down the far side, gets that pass across the slot, and Wennberg, to the surprise of Kraken fans everywhere, fires off a shot and scores! Number 21 giving the Kraken the 2-1 lead and putting it off of the shoulder glove side of Georgiev into the net. And again, not to pat myself on the back too much, but in that series preview video, this is that spot where the Kraken tend to like to finish things on this right side, as well as where the Kraken finishing overlapped with the spots that Georgiev had been letting in more than the NHL average over the course of the season. Sure enough, it's glove side around that faceoff circle that Wennberg fires this off and beats Georgiev's glove off his shoulder and into the net to give the Kraken that important lead right back at the start of the second. But then, not long after, the Avalanche do end up getting that next call in the game. The Kraken go to the penalty kill, and well, again, like I mentioned in that preview, the Kraken power play versus the Avalanche penalty kill is a bit of a mid versus mid matchup, with the Kraken power play having a bit of a hotter last month, but still a pretty middling power play, and the Avalanche penalty kill a bit of a middling penalty kill. In fact, they were exactly 16th at the end of the season. This matchup of the Avalanche power play versus the Kraken penalty kill, at least in the back half of the season, was strength versus strength. For the Avalanche penalty kill over the course of the whole season, finished 6th in the NHL, so definitely one of the most dangerous power plays, and they did that through all of the injuries, and now they've got their full cast of characters, and even if Makar doesn't have his full legs under him, well, all he really has to do is sit up by the blue line and use his vision and playmaking, which is still very much intact. Meanwhile, the Kraken penalty kill, while it had an abysmal start to the season, it was one of the NHL's best in the back half, and that continues to be the case here as the Kraken weather this storm and come out of it still with that lead intact, which they're able to turn right around into momentum back the other way. The Avalanche don't allow anything to come of that, though. Georgiev's starting to settle in a bit, and then the Colorado Avalanche get another power play, which, again, the Kraken do a pretty good job of killing off, thanks in part to the stick of Philip Grubauer, as one of the shots, actually, I think this came on the first power play, there's a shot from, it might have been Makar up by the blue line that gets through everyone, and honestly probably had Grubauer beat, but it ends up going off of the nub of his stick up beyond his hand and deflects out. So Grubauer, an absolutely lights out game this entire time. And when you're going to have a game where you're absolutely standing on your head, as Grubauer was in this game, sometimes you might get a couple lucky ones, and this one probably was one of those. Either way, though, the important thing is that the puck stays out of the net, and it does that here. It continues to do so for both nets the rest of the way, as this second period becomes pretty back and forth, almost a track meet up and down the ice, just not a ton of high danger opportunities, and the few that there were, honestly, kind of came for the Avalanche, and Grubauer made one more series of fantastic saves to prevent the Avalanche from tying this game right back up late in the period. He had one series that was on a rush for Colorado. I think it might have been Lehkonen again that gets the first shot off. That saved, but then the rebound goes right back out into the slot where, again, I think it was Nichushkin coming in, and he gets a wide open shot point blank on Grubauer as he's backed all the way up onto his goal line. Still, he's able to prevent that one from going in as well, and then kicks it out to the side where only the Kraken can get to it. And, I mean, Philip Grubauer standing on his head, and you could hear some scattered grooves throughout the background noise and the oohings and awings of the Avalanche, who wish they had maybe seen a little bit more of that when he played for them. Though, again, honestly, Grubauer was pretty good for the Avalanche in the playoff runs that he had with them. Still, I think the Avalanche could have done with a little bit less playoff Grubauer and a little bit more 2021-22 Grubauer. So thanks in large part to Grubauer, but as well Wennberg with that goal at the beginning of the second, the Kraken are going into a third period with a 2-1 lead. And that has been a big deal over the course of this season, where even though the Kraken have had some issues in the second period here and there, and well, especially towards the end of the season, we saw some overtimes forced where maybe you wouldn't have liked it too late in games, they ended the season 35-1-3 when entering the third period with a lead. Now, when it comes to playoff hockey, that might as well be 35-4 because there's no difference between an overtime loss and a normal loss, but still 35-4 is a pretty good record. So if the Kraken can play their game in the third period and play it the way they did all season, there's a pretty good chance they're coming away with this win. And happily, those chances get even better when once again, in the first few minutes of a third period in a row, though this time it does take the Kraken a full 4 minutes rather than the 3.5 of the first period or the 1.5 of the second period, it's the Kraken back in the offensive end with a puck rimming down along the boards, and Manson's going to get to it first, but he's a bit lazy getting to the puck, just kind of waiting for it to come to him. It ends up taking a weird hop off the boards, which helps out Wennberg coming the other way, and Wennberg dives on this puck, takes it back the other way. Geekie gets open out in front of the net in the low slot. Wennberg gets the puck to Geekie, and he buries it over that shoulder. Once again, the same spot that Wennberg scored from. Geekie beats Georgiev shorthand glove side on that shoulder and into the net to give the Kraken the 3-1 lead early on here in the third. And for Geekie, his first NHL playoff goal. And I'll admit, although I was hopeful about the Kraken chances going into the third period with that lead, it was at this point where Geekie scores that I really started to believe that the Kraken were actually going to end up winning this game. Still though, they really had to hold on to it the rest of the way, and to be honest, it did kind of seem like they went into a much more defensive first mentality the rest of the way throughout this game, really focusing on making transition into the offensive end hard for the Avalanche and then forcing things to the outside once they were there, but not getting too aggressive when it came to pinching down in the offensive end or throwing too many guys down below the defense of the Avalanche in that offensive end and allowing things to come back at them with odd man rushes, which I suppose was probably the right call in the end, especially considering, well, it worked. And although the Avalanche do end up now getting pretty much the momentum offensively throughout the rest of this game, the Kraken do a good job of those things, limiting the breakouts through the neutral zone of the Avalanche and making it hard for them to get into the offensive end, and once there, keeping any chances to the outside. So not a lot of dangerous looks for Colorado in this third period. And any they did get, again, Grubauer was stopping everything. And as this got later and later into the third, the Avalanche started to really break down, it seemed like. Certainly they got more and more desperate. Their passing was not very crisp, really throughout the game, but especially the later it got and the more desperate they got to try and get that second goal to get to within one. And even outside of the Avalanche passing not being particularly on point, which I think was in part due to how good of a job the Kraken were doing of pestering the Avalanche transitioning through the neutral zone and not making it easy for them to make those nice passing plays that they like to do in transition. The later it got and the more desperate the Avalanche got, a couple of times it wasn't just the passing, they just straight up forced their own way offside, which killed a couple of rush chances they could have had. And honestly, two of the ones I can think of in particular, I don't even really know that the Kraken forced the subject at all. The Avalanche just put themselves offside, and one of them was McKinnon going offside with Rantanen carrying it in. So it's not like it was the Avalanche depth that was the Achilles heel here. It was just as much that top line that just couldn't seem to really work as a cohesive unit, and often it turned into just a three guys out there trying to make it happen all by themselves, which the Kraken were happy to work as a team defensively to shut down. Eventually then, still needed 2 goals to tie it, the Avalanche end up pulling Georgiev with the faceoff in the Kraken end and 4.5 minutes left in the game, which they do manage to win that faceoff. Actually, no, the Kraken win a couple of the faceoffs, but Dunn misses the empty net once and ices it a second time. So a third one, eventually the Avalanche do get set up. They get the puck towards the net a couple of times, but again, nothing particularly dangerous, and not too long. Grubauer is able to freeze one of those, which leads to another faceoff. And right off of this faceoff, with about 4 minutes left in the game, almost exactly 4 minutes left in the game, Dunn takes a slash to the hands, and I'll be honest, I think he acted this one up a bit. He does get hit in the hands by a stick, so it is by the rule a slash, but for playoff rules, which are weirdly different, and that's a whole different issue, it might have been a bit of a soft call that Dunn helped out a bit. To be fair to Dunn, he did take a puck to the face earlier on in this third, so he'd probably had enough of being hit by things. Either way, that sends the Kraken to the power play with 4 minutes left in the game, and it's a power play that I think the Kraken were mostly just interested in. I mean, yeah, sure, if it's there and you could make it 4-1, great, but just try to prevent anything shorthanded going back the other way and kill off these 2 minutes. A strategy that seemed particularly obvious by the fact that for most of this power play, the Kraken had their normal 2 defensemen, 3 forwards out there. And sure enough, although the Kraken actually do end up allowing a shot on goal shorthanded during this time, they allow these 2 minutes to get past without the Avalanche getting a shorthanded goal. The Avalanche go back to 6-on-5 for 2 more minutes. The Kraken ice this one away and come away with the Game 1 win, 3-1 over the defending champs. So, as for takeaways from this absolutely massive Kraken win, again, the first ever playoff game, the Kraken get their first ever playoff win, the only franchise to be undefeated in the playoffs in their franchise history. Even if it is just the one game, we're definitely going to keep enjoying that as long as it stays true. Also, it's the first ever playoff win in the GM career of Ron Francis, so a big thing worth noting there for him. Probably, I mean, the biggest takeaway has to be Philip Grubauer stopping 34 of 35, an absolutely incredible night from him. Really, the Philip Grubauer that got him to be that Vezina finalist, and honestly, the Philip Grubauer the Avs saw in the playoffs more often than not in the 3 runs he had with them. It was a fantastic night for him, and as long as he can keep playing like this, the Kraken definitely have a good chance to make some noise in these playoffs. Outside of Grubauer, though, who, spoiler alert, we're going to be mentioning here again in a little bit, the second biggest takeaway from this game for me was the health of the 2 teams, where although coming into the game, both were only missing the one notable player for the Kraken, Burakovsky, who may very well be out for this entire playoff run. It doesn't sound like there's much of a chance of him coming back for the first 2 rounds, so the Kraken would have to make it to the conference final or cup final for him to have a chance to come back, and even then, it's been a couple of setbacks now, so it might just be the end of the season for him. Meanwhile, for Colorado, the only player that's still missing from their roster is Landeskog, the captain, so a pretty big piece. It still does kind of seem like a lot of these guys, even if they're out there on the ice, and again, we used Makar as the prime example of it, a lot of them seem like they're still battling some injuries that they were throughout the season. Now, again, it is just one game, so maybe we shouldn't be reading into that too much. After all, the Avalanche did finish the back half of the season pretty hot to weather that storm of injuries mostly in the first half of the season and make their way not only into the playoffs, but to win the Central Division. Even still, though, it does at the very least seem like something to be watching here, at least over the next couple of games, and especially in the case of Cale Makar, who is obviously one of, if not the most important part of that team, if they want to make it past the Kraken, much less make it deep into the playoffs. Plus, it's certainly something to watch when it comes to the last thing I want to mention here, which is mostly for those of you who are new to playoff hockey, with this being the first playoff game for the Kraken. That being, again, like we mentioned in the preview, that even between 2 teams who were not the hardest hitting, in fact, they were among the bottom third in hitting in the league over the course of this season, the playoffs are an entirely different animal. And although this was not the hardest hitting game of this first round of games in the first couple of nights, it was still much harder hitting than just about any game the Kraken played over the course of the season. I mean, the Kraken had one of their highest hitting nights of the entire year with 40 on the night, and the Avalanche with 29, also well over their average per game in the regular season. And as far as that goes, as we get to the Kraken 3 stars, although neither one of these guys are going to get stars, both Borgen and Larson were laying some hits in this game, both of them receiving some hits as well, but incredibly physical defensive games from both Larson and Borgen on the back check, and then on the forward check, Yanni Gord, Tanev, and Sprong all throwing their body around, especially Yanni Gord really putting on display what helped the Lightning win back-to-back cups when he was a part of those teams. As for the three guys that I actually am going to give the Kraken 3 stars of the game to, though, I'm going to end up going with the same 3 stars as the official 3, which has to be said, I'm not entirely convinced that whoever was handing out these official 3 stars wasn't watching the live stream, because I named the exact same 3 stars that they named officially and in the same order at the time in the stream, or before they named these official 3 stars, I named the same 3 in that order at the end of the game. So, they probably weren't listening, but seems like an awfully big coincidence. Again, I'm going to stick with the same 3, but I am going to switch up the order a bit here. I'm going to end up going with Philip Grubauer as the number 1 star. An absolutely outstanding night for him, standing on his head most of the game, which, as I said during the stream, is a bit ironic considering a lot of the big saves he made were along the ice with his pads down and especially making saves off of rebounds right out in front. In the end, again, coming up with 34 saves on 35 Colorado Avalanche shots, a few of those particularly dangerous ones and a couple off of rebounds. Yeah, he got helped out a bit by maybe getting a bit lucky with that one that went off the end of his stick and a couple that went off of posts behind him, one off of his shoulder, then off the bottom of the crossbar that somehow stayed out. Still, he was having a fantastic night, and even with a couple of lucky breaks, that's just kind of what happens when you create your own luck in goal. So with Grubauer as the first star, the second star probably shouldn't come as any surprise. It's going to be Alex Wennberg. He was the best skater on the ice out there for the Kraken, not only with the beautiful setup for the geeky goal that ends up being the final goal, but also getting the game-winning goal himself on that nice pass from Schwartz. That whole line had a very good night, but Wennberg was the leader of it with the goal and the assist, and once again showing his defensive prowess on a number of occasions in the defensive end as well, so well-deserved second star. And then the third star, there were a couple of guys that I considered here. Larson was among them. Schwartz was among them as well. In the end, though, actually McCann had a fantastic night in the defensive end. I want to mention that. In the end, though, I am going to end up going with Eli Tolvanen. He gets the Kraken on the board first with that first ever franchise history playoff goal, and continued to have a strong night with a few more shots on goal, a couple of which very much could have ended up in the net if Georgiev wasn't as good of a goaltender as he is, even with the 3 that he lets in. Still, great night from the Finn, and in the end, we're going Grubauer 1, Wennberg 2, and Tolvanen 3. With that, though, as much as I'd love to keep going on and on about this game, eventually I do have to get to bed and get to editing this video so you can eventually see it. And as always, I'd love to know your comments down in the comment section below, who your 3 stars of this game would be, what you did to celebrate this first ever Kraken win in the playoffs, and what we're looking forward to in the rest of this series. Otherwise, the last thing that I do want to mention before moving on completely from this game is definitely a bit on the opposite note from the huge historic win for the Kraken, the biggest win in franchise history. Unfortunately, it's a historic win for the Kraken that a big part of the reason that the Kraken even exist in the first place never got to see. That being Andy Ide of Sound of Hockey, who unfortunately, after suffering that stroke that we talked about a couple weeks back, did end up passing away on Friday. I thought about mentioning it in the preview, and I put a couple of videos out since then. It just didn't seem like the right place to do it. But this is something that he obviously would have loved to see. One of the absolutely biggest impacts in the Kraken hockey community, and not just Kraken hockey, but Seattle hockey community. He was really one of the first people to go all in on covering the Thunderbirds, just doing that of his own free will and making his career as a hockey writer happen by just deciding to cover the Thunderbirds and his love of the game. even outside of his love of the game, what he did for the Seattle hockey community and helping make the Kraken happen and come to Seattle in the first place. He was genuinely a great person. I met him a couple of times, definitely got to share a lot of post-game media scrums with him. And yeah, just a great guy that everyone that met him and was lucky enough to call him a friend absolutely loved. So this one's definitely for Andy, and hopefully they can keep this run going for him. And I think it goes without saying that any thoughts, prayers, or kind words you can send the way of Andy's family or the guys at Sound of Hockey or any other friends of his that you may know, I'm sure would be greatly appreciated. And we'll be thinking of Andy anytime the Kraken or Thunderbirds pretty much do anything the rest of the way, because he's a big part of the reason, again, not only the Kraken exist, but a lot of people got into the Thunderbirds and hockey in general in the Seattle area. And with that, again, sorry to end it on a bit of a down note, but Andy would be celebrating this win just as much as anybody else, if not more. So if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video or the stream that came before it, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel and will allow you to come back for hopefully more Kraken playoff wins throughout the rest of this playoff run, however long it lasts. Until then, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.